Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's the post-game podcast for the Wolves' win over the Luka Doncic-less Dallas Mavericks on Thursday night. It was a bit of an uneven performance, to say the least, but there were still really positive moments on the offensive end and overall for the Wolves. But let's talk about those turnovers. What is leading to this sloppy offense from the Wolves here recently? We'll break it all down here on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. And I guess you're off the top. I'll apologize. I blame a holiday. I have COVID and catching COVID over the holiday here this week. And so this show is posting a little bit later than it typically does on Friday. Had to get caught up on everything. So apologies for the show posting a little bit later. Maybe you're listening to this on Saturday, getting ready for Wolves Lakers tonight. So apologize for the tardiness of posting the show. And then also for, I guess, my voice and any weird things that happened with my voice or my cough over the course of this show. So that's, I guess, where we'll start today. We will, by the way, have a live postcast Saturday night, and I'll be hosting the live postcast with our friend Tyler Metcalf from Canis Hoopus. So here's hoping that my voice sounds a little better by Saturday night for Wolves Lakers for that postcast. So anyway, all that's upcoming this weekend. Today, though, this is the postgame pod from Wolves Mavs. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right. So the Wolves beat the Mavericks on Thursday night by 8. And, of course, no Luka Doncic and still no Kyrie Irving. He's been out now for the better part of, 3 weeks or so for the Mavs with the heel injury. So no Luka, no Kyrie. And yet the Wolves still gave up 110 points. They still were only up 5 with under 3 minutes to play in this game. Like, this game was close down the stretch. And you look up at the Wolves still, like, if you didn't watch this game, you just look at the box score and say you don't even look at the final score. You just look at the box score itself without looking at the score. The Wolves shot over 51% from the field. They shot 51.5% from the three-point line. And they attempted 34 free throws to the Mavs' 19 free throws. Rebounds, the Wolves are a -1 overall, though they did allow a bunch of offensive rebounds. So, like, you look at the shooting numbers, you'd be like, oh, they held Dallas to 44% shooting for the floor. They attempted 15 more free throws than Dallas. This is probably, 15 to 20 point win for the Wolves. Well, if you kept reading the box score and you got to the part where the Timberwolves had 22 turnovers, actually more than that, that's 22 as a team, or individual turnovers, I should say. But if you add in the team turnovers, I actually think they were higher than that. Let's see. Oh, no, I guess it was 22 total. They didn't have any team turnovers. So 22 total turnovers in this game for the Wolves. The Mavs had 18, so it was obviously an uneven game for both teams. But the turnovers are obviously the story. And Chris Finch talked about this after the game, talked about it. I think he said his quote was, "It's time for us to grow up offensively." I want to dig into that a little bit more. Let's start with kind of the overall game flow and what happened in this game. The Wolves got out to a great start. Actually, the offense in the first quarter, if you only watch the first quarter, like, the Wolves offense was fantastic. It was super efficient. The ball movement was good. It was smart, good passing. I mean, Cat had that baseline drive with a lob to Rudy at the end of the shot clock, just a great pass. Rudy's passing on short rolls throughout the game whenever the Wolves got two-man game going, typically with Conley and Gobert. Gobert multiple times was stopping on a dime and kicking to the opposite corner, finding a shooter on the perimeter. Really smart passing from Rudy. We'll talk more about Rudy later. He had a great game. Anthony Edwards, in general, was making smart decisions with the ball in his hands early. He scored, 14, I think, in the first quarter, tying his season high for a first quarter, had 22 at halftime. And he certainly shot the ball a bunch, but overall, he had the right idea with a lot of his passes, too. it was a little bit sloppy. And as the Wolves got into the second quarter, that's when things got really sloppy offensively for Minnesota. They were up 11 at the end of the first quarter. But then in the second, and this started with the bench unit. It started with, with Nas on the floor, with Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Kyle Anderson. And then also, Ant was a part of a lot of those lineups too. But both Ant and Cat got really sloppy. Combined, they had 8 of the Timberwolves' 15 turnovers at halftime between Ant and Cat. And for the game, they combined for 11 of their 22 turnovers. Now, it makes sense your highest usage guys, the guys with the ball in their hand the most often, are going to make the most miscues, right? So it's maybe not a surprise that half of the Wolves' turnovers were committed by a combination of Cat and Ant. But 11 is too many for your two best players to combine to commit in a game like this. And again, if Luka plays, this thing probably looks a little bit different, or maybe a lot different at the end. So it was really the second quarter when things kind of started to derail for the Wolves offensively. Actually, really kind of the end of the first quarter into the second quarter. Karl-Anthony Towns had some really rough possessions, kind of fell back into the offensive foul stuff in this game. We actually saw that a little bit in Oklahoma City on Tuesday. Some bad offensive fouls, some bad overall decisions by Karl-Anthony Towns. And then in the third quarter, when this game was close and the Mavs, I think, actually took that 1-point lead a couple of times in the third quarter, the Wolves again had a strong burst of offense, like almost reminiscent of the first quarter, where the passing was crisp. They got out in transition and scored. They turned the Mavericks over and turned that into offense. But ultimately, then they allow the Mavericks back in the game in the fourth quarter with sloppy play. The Mavs go on like a 7-0 or 9-2 run late in the fourth. And that's what makes this a 5-point game with under 3 minutes to play. And then from there, the Wolves did a good job of getting to the line. They obviously did that throughout this game. They ended up with just a crazy 34 free throw attempts. There were way too many whistles in this game, by the way. And I know the Wolves ended up with 15 more attempts than Dallas, but for a chunk there in the second half, it was just like a whistle fest. Like every time down the court it seemed like somebody was shooting free throws for both teams. It was just a little bit too much. But anyway, this game was still close at the end. The Wolves got to the line enough down the stretch and got enough buckets to kind of put it away with, a couple minutes to play. Anthony Edwards was awesome for the first 3.5 quarters. He was 11 of 15 shooting at one point and 5 of 5 on threes. He finished this game 12 of 23, which means he went 1 of his last 8 from the field and 1 of his last 6 from outside the arc. He got a little bit, I don't know, I don't know if he was hunting for a 50-point game or what exactly happened down there at the end of the game, but it just became, and a couple of them were open. Like, they weren't all bad shots. Like, he had one in transition that was a wide open 3-point attempt that he just bricked off the back of the rim from the left slot. It was kind of just a bad miss. He had a couple of those down the stretch. So, it ultimately didn't matter. The Wolves won, but Ant was so good the first 3.5 quarters, and then just was not the same down the stretch in the game. I want to talk about this a little bit more and I get into key takeaways, but the offense itself, again, you look at the shooting percentages and they still scored 118 points despite all the turnovers. And really, I thought the half-court defense wasn't that bad, which is so weird when you look at 110 points for Dallas. Well, why is that? It's because all the Wolves' turnovers on offense led to far too many fast break points for Dallas. So I want to break that down a little bit more. I want to talk about a couple of key takeaways from this one before we get into individual studs and duds. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They are the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. With basketball season now well over, a little bit over a third of the way over. But also, by the way, the last 2 weeks of the NFL season with games on Saturday this weekend too, you can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. It's a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, this weekend you could take LeBron. I don't think Kansas City plays till Sunday, but over this weekend, maybe LeBron against the Wolves on Saturday, plus Travis Kelce. You could take like a 10.5-point combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions, take more than or less than, and see what happens there. You can also play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill, comedian Andrew Schultz, and more. You can find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names of the Prize Picks community each and every week. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA, code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, so key takeaways from this one. I talked a little bit about defense into offense for the Dallas Mavericks. And to be clear, when I say defense into offense, I mean Timberwolves sloppy offense into offense for the Dallas Mavericks. Dallas isn't exactly a defensive juggernaut. I know they've been better the last couple of years than anyone really expected them to be. And actually, without Luka on the floor, I don't know that it made them worse defensively, but they're 21st in defensive rating overall this season. And they do turn teams over a fair amount. Like they're a bad rebounding team. They allow a lot of open shots and all that. But they are 12th in terms of forcing turnovers as a defense. But still, it was far more the Timberwolves just being sloppy than it was Dallas playing well defensively. And if you look at overall for the game, Dallas had Dallas had 9 fast break points, but they also had 29 points off 22 Wolves turnovers. So a lot of these turnovers, like there were a lot of dead ball turnovers, the offensive fouls on Cat, they threw the ball out of bounds far too many times. It wasn't as much just like terrible pass picked off for a bucket from Dallas. Although basically I'm pretty confident all 9 of Dallas's fast break points came off of Wolves turnovers. They still gave up 29 points off of turnovers because Minnesota was just allowing Dallas to get out, not only just in the fast break, but also secondary break, getting open 3-point attempts. I haven't mentioned Tim Hardaway yet. He's actually probably the primary reason that Dallas hung around in this game. He had 32 points. Nobody else on the Mavs had more than 17. Hardaway had 32. He had 5 made threes, 32 on 19 shots in this game. And, Dallas as a team shot 42% from 3. A lot of that was getting these open threes in transition and in the secondary break. Hardaway made a couple tough contested threes over Nickeil Alexander-Walker, et cetera. But it was the Wolves allowing Dallas to turn defense into offense. Or again, I'll say it this way again: the Wolves' sloppy offense allowing Dallas to get easier buckets, easier looks on the offensive end of the floor. And Minnesota was actually fortunate that Dallas didn't capitalize more on some of those attempts. Dallas, again, for the game, shot only 44.4% from the field, but they were over 42% from 3. So Minnesota's half-court defense, again, wasn't all that bad, and they forced Dallas into 16 turnovers. They had some strong possessions. Troy Brown Jr. had a really strong stint in the first half. He didn't play at all in the second half, I don't believe. But he had a steal in the open floor that was really impressive and turned it into a one-man fast break the other way. Ants had a couple of impressive steals. Like, again, the Wolves' half-court defense was solid. They actually blocked, how many shots did they block in this game? 10. They blocked 10 shots. Jaden had 4 and Rudy had 3. It was the transition defense, which never really had a chance for Minnesota because the offense was so sloppy and Dallas had so many good looks in that regard. I do also want to underscore the offense in the first quarter and for parts of the third was so good. Again, the Wolves shot over 51% from the field, over 51% from 3, and attempted 34 free throws. If they didn't turn the ball over, you're looking at 130 plus points easy in a 48-minute regulation game. If they score on half those possessions that they turned it over, like say they turned it over 10 less times and scored on half of those possessions, which is, I think, a reasonable, that's not crazy, right? So say you turn it over a normal 11 or 12 times in a game, take those 10 possessions and say they averaged, a point per possession on those possessions, score on half of them. That's an 18-point win instead of an 8-point win. And that's an easy 128, 130 points. That's not crazy, right? Dallas was allowing the Wolves to score. Like they just didn't. Dallas is not a good defensive team. Minnesota shot themselves in the foot time and time again. And again, got good looks when they weren't turning it over and made those looks when they attempted them. It was just, they shot themselves in the foot far too much in this game. Which is obviously the biggest takeaway. I'm going to throw up the stats here to kind of underscore that from the game. The Wolves, again, shooting over 51% from the field. Dallas over 44%. Same number of 3-point attempts for both teams, which is a number that I highlighted quite a bit after the Thunder game the other day when OKC shot, 13 or 16 more 3-pointers in that game, when for the season, OKC's not shooting that many threes. It's just the Wolves allowed themselves to get outshot from outside the arc, which can't happen. And in this game, I thought the Wolves did a good job of keeping pace in terms of shooting enough threes and also contesting Dallas from deep for the most part, even though they shot okay from deep. The turnovers we talked about, I realize I flipped that now on my graphic. The Wolves are the team that had 22 turnovers, not Dallas. So Dallas had 16, Minnesota had 22 as a team. Dallas was a +1 on the glass, and then the Wolves were a +15 in terms of free throw attempts and +9 in terms of made free throws. So, again, a really strong game for Minnesota getting to the line. We'll talk more about Anthony Edwards, but he was awesome getting to the line, especially early in this game. My third takeaway is just like I could easily cover this in studs and duds, and I guess I'll mention him. But Rudy Gobert was, for as good as Ant was, I thought Rudy was actually the best two-way player, best all-around player for like start to finish in this game. Partly because Ant struggled at the end of the game, and he was part of the reason the Wolves couldn't put this thing away, which I realize I'm nitpicking because he was so good. For the first 3.5 quarters, Anthony Edwards looked like the best player on the planet. Like, there's no question about that. But Rudy Gobert, start to finish in this game, was so important to the Timberwolves pulling this one out. We can start with the 20 points on 7 shots and the perfect 7 of 7 from the field for Rudy. He also had 11 rebounds. He made 6 of his 7 free throw attempts, and I think it was the first 6 that he made too. He just missed his last one, which is awesome to see him continue to make progress in terms of making free throws. He also had 3 blocks in this game, 11 rebounds, a couple of assists as well. And it was the little things he did on both ends of the floor. I already talked about his passing on short rolls early in the game. He's so good at that and so good at avoiding charges. Teams are trying to step up and bring the low man against him to, not allow him to get dunks. And we saw him I forget who passed it to him, but he had a dunk where he just rumbled down the lane, caught the pass just under the free throw line and got a 2-handed throwdown. That was awesome. He had a couple of those, but he also had a couple plays like that where he stopped short of the contact when the low man's stepped up, and he oftentimes is kicking it to the opposite corner, right? It's what he did so often in Utah. And I think people forget, like, even if Rudy's not a quote unquote great passer, like he's not making flashy passes like Cat attempts to make or other bigs like Jokic obviously are making, and Jokic's on another level, obviously. But Rudy, though, going back to his time in Utah, is so good at that, setting a screen, rolling, sensing the low man stepping up or seeing the low man starting to come, catching and swinging to the opposite corner. We saw him do that with a couple of times in this game, but then also stop and not throw it to the corner, but throw it back out to the perimeter, above the break for an open shooter out there. Like he just seems to have this really strong awareness of where everybody is on the floor. And as awkward as he can look sometimes with the ball in his hands, he's a really intelligent player, and he understands, obviously you have to be as good as he is defensively. And I get that he's a massive human and he's a great shot blocker, but he's also very smart, and he knows on both ends of the floor where everybody is at virtually all times. And he made a number of really impressive passes, not all that led to assists in this game. He only finished with 2 assists, but his passing was 100%. It was on point in this game. And defensively, he was his typical awesome self. I mean, Dante Exum tried to challenge him in the first half. It was just a silly, like, oh yeah, I'm going to go right at Rudy. And like Dante Exum of all people, who's not like going to dunk over anybody, tried to lay it up over Rudy, and Rudy blocked it easily. Teams are we talked about this actually quite a bit. I think it was earlier in the week. It might've been Monday or Tuesday show. I talked about rim deterrence. I think it was Tuesday's show. And Rudy, teams are shooting the ball frequency wise, 6% less within 4 feet of the rim when Rudy's on the floor, and accuracy wise are shooting it 7 or 8% worse. But it starts with the deterrence. Teams are afraid to shoot it at the rim because of Rudy Gobert. And that's exactly why is what happened to Dante Exum. He just looks silly taking it right at Rudy. For the game, the Mavs actually had 4 more points in the paint, and that was more just due to some, I think it was more due to fast break points and some of those easy secondary break looks that the Mavs ended up getting throughout this game. But early, especially, Rudy set the tone in the paint, and he was a huge part of the Wolves pulling out this win. And you could make the argument he was the best player on the floor in this game. All right, I want to close with individual studs and duds. We'll talk a little bit about the bench, which has been fairly quiet here recently. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers Stay Hot on FanDuel. It's officially winter now, and I guess next podcast will be on New Year's Day, so it'll be 2024. It's the last podcast of 2023. Right now, though, new customers at FanDuel will get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. It's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action, and the app is extremely easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options that include spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Go over there, check out, I should have pulled this up, but what the Wolves' odds are to win the West or win the championship, win the division. We talked about that. It was one of the best we talked about at the Minnesota basketball party before the year. The Wolves' odds to win the Northwest division were it would have been a nice bet if you'd placed that. And I get that Denver's in their division, but post-championship hangover, do the Nuggets really care about winning the division? Obviously, they're within a game and a half now of the Wolves anyway, but go check that bet out there. Also, you could just bet on Wolves-Lakers for Saturday night. We'll talk about that line here in a minute as well. Go ahead and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL, or kick off the, final 2 weeks of the NFL season. Continue your NBA season over there at FanDuel. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, let's close this show out today by talking individual studs and duds. We'll talk briefly about Wolves Lakers on Saturday as well. We'll kind of peek at their injury report, and also we'll look at the line, as I mentioned, over at FanDuel. So we'll do all that here at the end of the show, though. But in terms of individual studs and duds for this one, I already talked about Rudy, so I'll just list his line one more time. But obviously, he was absolutely a stud in this game, and as I said, arguably the best player on the floor. 20 points on a perfect 7 of 7 from the field, 6 of 7 at the line. 11 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 blocks, only 2 turnovers in 38 minutes for Rudy. He was fantastic on both ends of the floor. Anthony Edwards was the best player on the floor for most of the game. He had 44 points on 12 of 23 shooting. Again, he started 11 of 15 from the field, 5 of 5 from outside the arc, finished 1 of 8 from the field, and 1 of 6 from outside the arc at the end of the game. Got to the line 18 times, made 14 of them. And this was not a function necessarily of the refs. I did say I thought they called too many fouls in this game. There were a couple fouls that Ant got to the line on that I would have been upset if I was a Mavs fan. I just think there were too many fouls called in general. It was refreshing to see Ant be aggressive. The mid-range game was almost non-existent for Ant in this game. He made one. I think he was like, let me look at his shot chart real quick. I don't think he shot too many mid-range shots in this game. I actually thought his shot selection was pretty good. And that's partly what helped, a big part of why he got to the line so often in this game. Let's see. He was 2 of 5. Well, no, 2 of 6 on mid-range shots, which I'm going to call non-paint twos. He was 2 of 6 on non-paint twos. So he did shoot a couple more non-paint twos than you'd like to see. But he got into the paint so often, it was basically he was getting into the paint and getting fouled or shooting a mostly open three-pointer. And that's a recipe for success for Ant. And even with that late game, struggles with Ant, he still had 44 on 23 shots, which is insanely efficient. He was really, really good in this game. 4 assists, 3 rebounds, 3 steals. He did have 6 turnovers, and he was the primary culprit. He and Kat were for what Chris Finch was complaining about after the game to the media about this team needing to grow up offensively. There were some ugly moments with Ant with the ball in his hands, but he was still really good. And we can set those, not completely set those turnovers aside, but we can acknowledge how good he was, outside of that for sure. Third stud for me in this game, I'm going to go with Jaden McDaniels. I thought he was consistently solid in this game. He didn't have any rebounds in 34 minutes, which isn't great. And it's unusual that I'm picking somebody who's invisible on the glass as a stud in this game. He had a couple of big buckets. He had a nice and one, 2 of 3 on threes, hit some corner threes, looked very comfortable. He had 4 blocks in this game. It was just a nice McDaniels game after he'd been a little inconsistent here recently. And I thought he was good defensively too. Exum and Jaden Hardy combined to shoot just 12 of 29 from the field. And I guess they were 4 of 9 from 3, but they also turned it over 4 times to only 7 assists. So the backcourt for Dallas wasn't all that effective. Hardaway went nuts, but that, the Wolves didn't necessarily do anything wrong there. So I thought it was a good McDaniels game overall. Duds for me, I'm just going to go with Karl-Anthony Towns. This was not a good Cat game. And obviously he missed the game last Saturday, came back and played against OKC on Tuesday. Didn't quite look like himself. He was very uncomfortable in this game. This was much more like, 2 years ago, Cat. 10 points, 8 rebounds, 3 of 12 shooting, 5 turnovers, committed 5 fouls, some silly offensive fouls, looked uncomfortable, was complaining a lot. I get it. I'll advocate for Cat every day of the week that I think he should get to the line more often. But as we've documented many times before on the show, Cat doesn't do himself any favors with the way he acts and the way he behaves. And this was another one of those. He was just a little bit whiny and a little out of position at times defensively, a little overly aggressive on offense. There in a couple of nice possessions in there, got to the line a couple of times. Just wasn't a great all-around Cat game. 10, 8, and 3, but he also had 5 turnovers and 5 personal fouls in this game in 27 minutes. So not an ideal Karl-Anthony Towns game. I don't have any other duds. Nas was, a bit all over the place. He had 3 turnovers. Kyle Anderson had 3 turnovers, but he also had 10 rebounds, was second on the team in rebounding. Slow-mo was. So I would describe the Wolves bench kind of as, the team as a whole was uneven in this game. Slow-mo had some good moments. You also had head-scratching turnovers. Exact same with Naz Reid. He was 3 of 5 from the field. All 5 of Naz's shot attempts were 3-pointers in this game. He was just a spot-up shooter, and he was effective. right? Like he was a plus 12 off the bench for Minnesota in this one. So I thought, for the most part, the bench played okay. I mentioned Troy Brown's stint was good. Nikhil was fine. He had 4 steals in this game. It was just that the bench scoring has been down here of late for Minnesota. I'm glad that Chris Finch is still finding moments for Troy Brown Jr. to get into the game. He's apparently supplanted Shake Milton now in terms of the bench rotation. I like Troy Brown minutes. I think they need to find a minute, more than 6 minutes to get him in the game. 6 minutes is better than nothing. I just think you need him to stay engaged. So when you do need him, he can be really effective when you need him in a big spot. And he also provides that juice, that energy that the Wolves don't always have off the bench or in general as a team. And Troy Brown gives a lot of that. So I'm going to keep advocating for Troy Brown on this show to get more minutes. All right. Wolves take on the Lakers Saturday night. Minnesota, LA, Saturday night from Target Center. And I was about to give the line, and there is no line yet on FanDuel because it is Friday and that game's Saturday. And also there's probably some questions in terms of who's available. As far as LA goes, they should have mostly a full complement of players. Cam Reddish has missed some time. He was out Thursday, so he may not play. Gabe Vincent is still out for them, of course. And they don't play Friday night either. So both teams, neither one will have a rest advantage. The Lakers beat Charlotte by 21 last time out. Of course, Minnesota beat LA with no LeBron. What was it, just last week or 2 weeks ago? So this will be an interesting matchup. And LA's been really good defensively here lately. And they do it just by being solid. They don't necessarily turn you over a bunch. They don't foul a lot. They're good They're a good rebounding team. So it's an interesting matchup. It's one that I don't hate for Minnesota. It's just, LeBron, by the way, LeBron's only missed 2 or 3 games this season, and one of those was the game against Minnesota. So we can expect LeBron to play Saturday. It'll be an interesting test because Minnesota just hasn't been as good lately. And I absolutely nitpicking. They still haven't lost 2 in a row. They're the only team in the league not to lose 2 in a row. They're still first in the West. I get it. This is a really tough stretch of the schedule. But going back to that, remember the Miami win was huge, but go back to that Philly loss. They got crushed by Philly, first night of a back-to-back, beat a LeBron-less Lakers team by only 7 at home. They beat Sacramento, which was a nice win. But then that Thunder loss wasn't all that competitive for much of it on Tuesday. Turnovers galore. They followed that. I think it was 24 turnovers on Tuesday with 22 turnovers, barely beating a Luka-less Mavs team on Thursday. So this Lakers game will actually be a pretty tough test for Minnesota. And you look at what's upcoming, it's still not getting any easier. Like the Wolves don't play a team that's likely to not be a playoff team until January 12th. That's still 2 full weeks away. Actually, 2 weeks from today, they play Portland. Every game between now and then is against a really good team. And the Lakers are only 8th in the West. But again, they're going to be relatively healthy. They're going to be, they're not on a back-to-back or anything like that, like Dallas was Thursday without Luka. So this is going to be an interesting game. I would expect the Wolves to be favored by, maybe 3.5, 4 points. I'm guessing the line's not up on FanDuel yet. The Wolves should be favored in this game. But with how they played lately, I'd be a little nervous about this one, if I'm being honest. Now, every time I've said that this year, the Wolves have bounced back and proven me wrong. So we'll see, virtually every time. So we'll see how that goes. As I mentioned earlier, we will have the live postcast here at Locked On Wolves. We actually go live on Locked On Sports Minnesota on YouTube. I'll be hosting this Saturday night with Tyler Metcalf from Katie Supis, and that audio will be posted here at the Locked On Wolves audio feed, so you can listen to that. If you miss it live Saturday night, you can listen to it on Sunday. We will have a New Year's Day show on Monday, which will kind of be a post-game pod from Saturday night's game. So that'll post on New Year's Day at some point, actually probably early New Year's Day. The Wolves play a matinee game on New Year's Day in Madison Square Garden, at Madison Square Garden, Monday afternoon at 2 p.m. Central. So I'll have the Monday show up early, bright and early. You can wake up after your New Year's Eve, shenanigans, imbibements, whatever it is you're doing on New Year's Eve. Wake up on New Year's Day, listen to Locked On Wolves, get you ready for Wolves Knicks on Monday afternoon. And that'll be the next time we have a full show in 2024. But again, live postcast Saturday night. We'll have the audio right here on the feed. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Amazon Fire TV and Roku. You can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, C-K-E-N. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.